How's it going, guys? This is Coach Wilson back with you. Talking more about cues today and sprinting. Last time I kind of went over the importance of cues and how you can use them. But today I want to talk about specifics, what cues to use, how to apply them, because the application is the most important part. I mean, if you could have all the knowledge and wisdom in the world, but if you can't apply it and get results, then what are you doing? So it's important to understand that, like I mentioned in the last video, just everybody is different. All runners are unique, and so they're going to have different perspectives. And so we have to find a way, though, regardless of what the athlete is thinking or the sensation that they're feeling when they sprint, we have to find a way to connect the dots, to get them to achieve the correct positions, the correct movements. And, I think I mentioned it in my last video, but I'll reiterate that sometimes it's not about cueing, though. It's not all about that. A lot of times, an athlete can just relax, and that fixes a lot of their technical issues. Or an athlete just isn't really developed. They don't have enough strength. They don't have enough coordination and drill work. They just don't have the experience. They're a beginner, or they're still young in their development, and they just don't have the power to achieve enough hip height, basically, to get into those positions. So no matter how much you cue someone in that situation, it's not going to do you any good. And you can, and a lot of times, even if they do have enough power, a lot of times I like to address the issue without cueing and trying to get it to the point where the athlete doesn't even have to think about, they don't have to think about things. So you have the athlete run hills or sleds, or you do easy build-ups and flying sprints, things of that nature. Push-up starts, another one. But doing different selections of exercise to put the athlete to where they're just going to automatically become more effective and efficient at what they're trying to do. So at any rate, I'm just going to get right into it now. So there's cues that are external and there's cues that are internal. And I've got some notes written down. So I would say that generally external refer to how we interact with, or the athlete interacts with, the outside world. An example would be to push the ground backwards, make the earth spin, drive forwards, towards the finish line. So you're trying to orient the athlete with their outside environment. And I don't really use a lot of those cues, to be honest, like pretty much never, to be completely honest with you, but I think that they could come in handy. It's just very rare that I've used them. Now, internal cues would refer more to more volitional, intentional effort and relating to usually a specific body part or limb and how that's moving. So rather than interacting with the outside environment or the surface, you're trying to do something with a particular body part. Drive your knees is one, extend your hips. I don't like those cues very much at all, especially, driving the knee and knee-based cues. But those are examples, or move your arm a certain way if you're telling someone to pull their arm down, which is generally, I think, a good cue. But it just refers to you trying to do something with the body part and doesn't have anything to do, again, with the external environment. And so there's other things to consider too. There's a lot more than just internal and external cueing. That's just one way of looking at a cue. Some people are going to respond pretty well to one versus the other, but there's a lot of gray area, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter all that much. But it's good to know that there's different ways of using cues, because some people just respond better or worse to one or the other. And then there's movements versus positions, something else that I look at. A position is just one moment, where the person is in space and where their body position is in one moment. So with a position, you can gain that from like a photo. It's just achieving a particular angles, particular shapes, postures in one given moment, though. That's the key. So a lot of people talk about, you just hit the right positions, just reach the right positions. And that's good and all, and it's important to have the correct position, but it's not enough. There's a question of, how are you getting to that position? And so that's what a movement is to me. It's how do you get from one position to the next? And, things are constantly, moving. It's important not to think about like, oh, you just have to, get into the high knee position, you're good. It's a movement, it's constant. So at any rate, something else I wanted to mention was that an athlete can achieve correct positions, but if they're not doing it in a way that's smooth, then it may not be very good. If someone is achieving, good extension and good flexion, the posture looks pretty good in one given moment, that's okay. But if from one step to the next they look choppy, or one step to the next they look stiff, they're not smooth, they look like maybe they're all over the place in between those positions, then that's the question that you ask is, can you achieve those positions smoothly? You can tell when someone is smooth or not. So that's just a sign that someone is being effective or efficient at their movement. So another way of working with an athlete is using analogies, and I find analogies to usually be very effective, and I do use a lot of them. So to me, analogies help the athletes grasp the concept of a movement, the idea of a movement, just an overall sort of sensation is what you're trying to convey with analogies. So that helps minimizing overthinking and prevents the athlete from really trying to overdo things volitionally, because it's a big picture concept. That's what you're trying to do with analogies. So some examples of that might be pushing a car or a shopping cart, telling an athlete to maybe rise gradually like an airplane, take off smoothly like an airplane. Just explaining those things to athletes can give them a big picture concept to where they're not going to have to hyperanalyze or overthink about one little thing. Or Charlie Francis gave an example a lot about spinning or slapping a wheel, and talking about, the slaps have to be sharp. If you really have a prolonged, stroke, it's gonna mess things up. But at the same time, the wheel does gradually get faster and faster and faster and faster. So implementing those concepts into an athlete's mind can help. Or you might tell them, it's like riding a bicycle. You're going through your gears, and it takes some time. But at the same time, you don't want to waste time. You want to get right into it. So providing explanations with your analogies and all of that really helps. And analogies aren't really position specific. It's not like, oh, achieve this angle and extend this and flex this. It eliminates all that, and that's why I like them a lot. And also, it just provides a framework for a given athlete to do what they need to do, because everybody's different. We got different builds, anatomy, We have different strengths and weaknesses. And so the fact that everybody is different, just giving them a general framework can allow them to funnel in and to achieve, what's optimal, ideal for them. Without, again, because you tell someone to flex or extend, and some people respond better or worse at that. So with specific instruction, you're trying to direct the athlete to a very specific position or a type of action, an angle, or again, telling them to shorten or lengthen a lever, focusing on a particular body part. For me, what works well is telling an athlete to be patient, to be relaxed, making sure that they feel the jiggle in their face. If you're doing that, then you're definitely going to have an easier time being relaxed. So just giving the athletes explanations is really important. Telling the athlete to wait for it. That's something that Charlie had mentioned. And telling them maybe let the frequency come to you. Because, as you go through a race, most people are going to feel an increase in their frequency between the start and going into top speed. So just teaching that patience makes such a big difference. Now, sometimes it's about, and this comes from Tom Tellez, Carl Lewis's coach, sometimes it's about instructing the athlete what not to do that matters even more. And that can open up a way for the athlete to move correctly without, overthinking and hyperanalyzing things. So if they are doing something, if they're running tense, don't tense up. If they're reaching, if they're overstriding, and you see that, you tell them don't reach. If they're choppy, don't be so choppy. I think that's a good starting point, because sometimes you tell an athlete to do something and they exaggerate it in the opposite direction. So understanding what they shouldn't do is important. Because I wrote down word for word what Tellez said. It's not what you tell the athlete, it's what you don't tell them. So it's important not to overdo things, and it's important to also tell them what not to do, I think. So that will help them not to muscle it, overlifting, overextending, and all that sort of thing. You can tell them not to use any more energy than is necessary. Don't tense your shoulders, your face, that can help them to automatically allow themselves to relax and things to fall into place. Because if the athletes are relaxed, they're not forcing things, generally their technique is going to be very good. So some of the standard cues that I use then are to relax and drop the shoulders. That's really important, because when you relax and drop the shoulders and you allow for a little bit of that shoulder rotation, that allows the hips to also have that same rotation. So as this shoulder comes forward, this side of the hip, the opposite side, is going to come forward too. And same thing with this shoulder and this hip. It sort of crosses over and you get hip rotation. So in order to have hip rotation, you have to relax the shoulders. So that's a really important directive for me. Always telling the athletes to stroke the arms and pump the arms. There's nothing wrong with that. You might find a difference between the word stroke the arm or pump the arm. Depends on the type of athlete. A frequency type of person might focus more on pumping their arms, whereas a stride length person might sound better with stroking the arm. It just depends how the athlete responds individually too, just mentally. it's just like in a classroom, you know, some people do math differently. So it's the same way with athletics and trying to accomplish a physical task. Some people just respond differently. For me, though, I notice now I try not to cue the legs a whole lot if I don't have to, but if I do have to, I think using direction-oriented cues with the legs is the most effective, more so than emphasizing those internal cues of flex, extend, move this way and that way. For me, it's get the direction of the movement right, and then other things fall into place, because it's not so much about just, you know, forcing things and force. It's applying that force, right? Force application. If you can get the force applied in the proper, correct direction, then a lot of the other things fall into place. So one of the popular ones that Charlie Francis used that I love is step down. Just cock the foot and step down. So that just tells the athlete to just put your foot right down, instead of reaching and pulling, or you know, just pushing back too much. Just put the foot down. That's Tom Tellez's words, word for word, is put the foot down. You know, this prevents overstriding. It's like if you have if you're a spoke on a wheel, you want that spoke to be, you know, completely up and down, right? So that's what we're trying to do with the athlete, is to get them to, you know, strike right under their center of mass. And so put the foot down, step down are really good cues for that. And I just find it so interesting that Charlie Francis says step down, Tom Tellez says put the foot down. You know, it's pretty much the same exact cue. And you'll also find there's other world-class coaches, and when I do my historical series and I go through those old books, you'll find some of these cues have been used timelessly. But it's amazing that some of the top coaches with the best athletes ever focus on, you know, just putting your feet down. Getting the feet down is just the focus, rather than, you know, trying to be big and long or trying to be choppy and quick and pull forward and backwards. It's not the forward and backwards, it's the vertical action of getting the feet down. Now, sometimes I think that stepping over is a good cue. It depends. I mean, Charlie used this cue quite a bit at times. That can prevent the athlete from over pushing, I think. They can help the athlete to not have so much backside mechanics. Stepping over just keeps the action nice and smooth, really, rather than making the sprint stride a sort of like two-part action where you flick the heel all the way back. Stepping over helps you keep your heels coming more straight up. Now, that's not to say that some athletes don't have a lot of that back kick and they have a lot of that sort of backside mechanics, because I think that some really good athletes have really good have a lot of backside mechanics, and they're some of the best runners, and I think it's important not to fix that. But I'm just saying that there are some athletes who are going to benefit from, hey, step over. You know, if you see them over pushing, then, you know, telling them to step over can help them get into the next stride without over pushing. Something else with cueing is, what is the focal point? So stepping over, or not stepping over, but what is the focal point is the part of the limb that you're looking at. So is the athlete focused on their hip, their knee, or their foot? Well, as you can imagine already, a good focal point is usually the foot, because if you're putting your feet up and down, that's automatically going to change the angle of the knee and the hip. But it doesn't really work the other way around. You could lift your knee, but your foot could be way out in front, or it could be tucked way behind you. You could be overstriding or understriding. So lifting the knee doesn't guarantee the foot's going to be in the right position. But if you get the foot in the right position, then almost always that's going to help the knee be right where it needs to be. So rather than thinking your knees up and down, a lot of the times it's good to think about the foot. And that's why you see a lot of cues are based on the feet. And the foot is, that's what is in contact with the ground. That's your interface with the ground. So I think it's generally good to focus on the foot. Now remember, there's always exceptions to all these rules. Some athletes, you tell them to focus on their feet and they might look kind of goofy, but I think the majority of the time these ones work, at least in my experience. You may have a different experience, and go ahead and comment down below, and definitely like to hear your perspective on things, the sensations that you get at sprinting, or the athletes that you work with, what they feel, what they notice. But generally speaking, it seems that most of the top athletes are only experiencing a up and down vertical action. They don't think like a lot of forward backward. In all the interviews I've seen and hearing athletes speak and top coaches with their athletes, it's not horizontally oriented, it's more vertically, like a piston like action. So other than that, I guess I did want to mention that on Charlie Francis's forums, charliefrancis.com, there's a forum there, and Flash is really insightful. And one of the things that he was talking about was stepping over. He talks about focusing on the foot. I know that he said that was the biggest difference for him when he was working with Charlie, was that the focus shifted from his knee to his feet. He was trying to really drive his knees. And once he started focusing on the foot, though, it changed things for the better, to where he was striking right bottom dead center, right underneath himself, and applying force correctly, better force application. And he said that it felt like he was stepping over his ankle, though. It didn't feel like he was stepping all the way over his entire leg. So that's the sensation he experienced. That's the change that he experienced. And so, the question is, step over what? Some people might ask. I don't think it's good to really say step over the entire leg or knee. Let the athlete step over however high or low they need to step over, is what I say. Because we see athletes with like really high heel recoveries, like Karsten Warholm, for example, or the Knighton kid. There's countless examples of guys who have pretty high heel recovery, and they're going to step way over, and that works for them. And then you're going to have some other people who don't really step over super high. Guys like maybe a Safa Powell, or someone who's just got a smaller range of motion, I would say Gatlin. Guys like that, though, who have really prominent front side mechanics, are going to maybe not feel as high of a step over. So it's going to feel differently, but at the end of the day, there's just a few different considerations. It's your environment, it's the task at hand, it's the anatomy of the athlete, the solution, though, is what's important. How are these things accomplished? And based on those different things, based on the amount of strength work an athlete has done, the amount of maybe plyometric work, that's going to determine, how the athlete accomplishes their task and how they feel during that. Some athletes are really going to feel bouncy because they've done a lot of plyometric work, or that's the way that maybe they're just built. They're very long, they're very elastic. But at the end of the day, it's important not to force things upon athletes, because then you're going to have athletes who have a big strength base and they're just going to feel totally different. They might feel a lot of frequency and quickness. So context is extremely important. You know, a young athlete who doesn't have a lot of power, they're not going to probably feel the same way as somebody who does have a lot of power. You know, an experienced sprinter is going to feel different sensations than a younger, developing, a slower sprinter. And so the focus needs to be shifted. So I guess that's something I could talk about next time, is an athlete and their development through time and how things sort of change and shift. You know, in one stage of one athlete's development, they are going to, you know, need different things than someone who's older. It's the same thing with anybody, you know, a kid in school, right? A young child in elementary school needs different things than the high school kid or the college kid, right? They all need different things. And so understanding those factors, that is what's going to really help an athlete continue to develop over the course of long term. Because there is a certain philosophy of cashing in right now, immediately. And you can coach athletes where you can get them a little better right now, but it could potentially hinder their long-term progress. You know, you could over cue them right now and it will probably make them a little better in some cases, but it could prevent them from getting into better positions later on in their career. An example of this is when Charlie was working with Angela Isajenko, and she at first had a really big stride. She was overstriding, but she was very young and developing. She didn't have much strength, and so her hips were lower. And so of course she's just going to naturally overstride. It's the same thing with kids, you know. If you look at them, they've got low hips. And so that causes them to overstride. And other coaches were telling Charlie, you know, hey, you got to fix Angela's stride and, you know, all this and that. And luckily he didn't listen to them, and she grew into her stride. So over time, as her power levels increased, her hips got higher and she was no longer overstriding. But she ended up being completely developing into an elite sprinter, and that's definitely a big reason why. Had he corrected her, it could have made her more choppy and she would have never grew into her full stride. So it's important not to overcorrect athletes. That's something that I would definitely emphasize. Don't overcorrect. So just to finish up, I've already explained context. That's important for you to understand as a coach. The intention, what is the athlete trying to do? And what are they actually doing in space? I've talked about that in the last video a lot. The sensation, what the athlete's feeling. And, you know, it's important to understand that the context often determines the sensation that the athlete is going to experience. If you have the athlete doing a lot of powerlifting, that's going to affect, you know, how they feel when they sprint. Or if you have them doing a lot of plyometric drill work, that's going to impact the sensation that they experience. And everyone's going to be different too, just based off of their anatomy. But at the end of the day, you want to link that intention with the sensation so that they can connect. And you want to do that in a way to where, okay, now I know that this cue works with this athlete. And so if they know what they're doing right and how that feels, that's how you get consistency. If an athlete doesn't know what it feels like to do it right, or they don't know what it feels like to do it wrong way sometimes, if they don't know what feels right or wrong, then how are you going to create consistency? You're not. So cues are a big part of being consistent and giving the athlete a focal point, something to really hone in and focus on, and that eliminates other distractions and other noise. So it's important though that your cues are not a distraction, but a focus for the athlete, to keep them in the zone, because some cues, if you over cue or you use the wrong cues, it's going to take the athlete out of the zone. But if you use them properly, just sprinkling them here and there where they're needed and being cautious with them, being general with them and vague, using more analogies, then the athlete's going to pick up on things and they're going to be more consistent. And at the end of the day, you'll have better results. So I hope you found some of these things useful. Again, I'm thinking now that the way this conversation has gone, I'll probably go into the differences between maybe beginners and intermediate and high level sprinters, and how you want to create that situation for the athlete to keep developing over time, to keep that progress going, because that is crucial. That is really the number one thing in my eyes. Because if you can improve until you're like 25, or even some people up into their 30s, 35, 40, like Kim Collins, for example, if you can keep improving over that long of a period of time, like there's a good chance that you're going to be one of the top athletes. And if not, at least you'll reach your potential. But I think it's important that we don't hinder our development, and that starts when we're young. So anyways, I'll talk more about that next time. Comment down below whatever you think, and maybe we'll get a discussion going. If you have some questions or things that you want covered in the next video, just let me know. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it, and see you next time.